You know that feeling when something just isn't right, but you can't put your finger on it? That cold shiver that crawls up your spine, the unsettling silence when there should be noise, the kind of quiet that feels alive. Yeah, I felt all of that the night we got lost in the fog. But this story isn't about me, at least not entirely. It's about the legend we stumbled into, one I wish we'd never heard of. Because once you know the truth, there's no going back. It started innocently enough. I was on vacation with a few friends. James, a guy with a fearless attitude. Abby, always the cautious one. And Mark, my best friend since childhood. We were exploring a small coastal town in northern Maine, the kind of place where people don't lock their doors and the locals whisper about strange happenings, but laugh them off as folklore. And we were looking for adventure, or at least we thought we were. We heard about this old lighthouse on a small, isolated island a few miles off the coast. The locals called it the Dead Man's Light, a name that felt more like a joke than a warning. Apparently, the lighthouse had been abandoned for over a century after a mysterious shipwreck. But every now and then, some fishermen would claim they saw its light cutting through the thickest fog. And sometimes, they heard voices. The stories all mentioned the ghost captain, but no one ever wanted to say much more. You can guess what happened next, right? We rented a small boat, grabbed some snacks and beer, and headed for the island. It was supposed to be fun, a night of camping and telling ghost stories under the stars. But we were wrong, so wrong. About halfway there, the fog rolled in like a living thing. I remember how quickly the world around us turned gray, the horizon disappeared, and the water became still. Too still. It was as if the ocean had stopped breathing. James laughed, saying we should have brought a map, but it wasn't funny. Not anymore. The fog was so thick that we couldn't see past the edge of the boat. Mark turned off the engine, thinking we should wait it out. But that only made the silence louder. And then we heard it. A faint sound at first, like the creaking of wood. The kind of sound an old ship makes when it's rocking in the water. But there was no ship around us, just fog. James joked about the ghost captain again, but no one laughed this time. The fog felt suffocating. Time stretched and warped in that heavy gray cloud. Every sound, every ripple in the water made us jump. Abby kept glancing over her shoulder as if expecting to see something or someone behind us. But there was nothing, only the sound of the creaking, growing louder, closer, and then a light. At first it was distant, a soft glow breaking through the fog. But as we stared, it moved closer, flickering in the mist like a lantern swaying in the wind. I could hear Mark whisper, "What is that?" But I had no answer. It wasn't until the light was just a few yards away that we saw it. The outline of a ship. An old, weather-beaten ship that didn't belong in this century. Its massive, tattered sails flapped in the wind, but there was no wind, just the eerie quiet and the creak of the ship's wooden hull. I swear for a moment, time itself stopped. "What the hell is that?" Abby's voice trembled, and for the first time, I saw fear in James's eyes. He wasn't the type to get scared easily, but this was something else. Suddenly the ship's lanterns flared, lighting up the fog like it was alive. And standing at the helm of that ghostly ship was a figure, a tall man, or what looked like a man, dressed in an old captain's uniform, his face hidden beneath the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. His eyes. I'll never forget those eyes. They were glowing, a cold blue light that cut through the fog and pierced through us. The air grew colder, I could see my breath hanging in front of me, and it wasn't long before the others noticed it too. The temperature had dropped fast, unnaturally fast. The boat began to rock, as if the water beneath us was shifting, but we were still in the dead center of the fog, surrounded by silence. Shouldn't we go back? Abby's voice was barely a whisper, but we all knew the answer. There was no going back, not anymore. The captain raised one hand slowly, pointing directly at us, and that's when the voices started. Not human voices, not normal. It was as if the fog itself was speaking, whispering our names. My name, James, Abby, Mark. Panic set in. James grabbed the engine and tried to start it, but the boat wouldn't move. It was stuck, trapped in the fog. The voices grew louder, more insistent, and then we saw them. Faces in the mist, distorted and twisted with anger. Hundreds of them swirling around the ship, their mouths open in silent screams, their eyes locked on us. We weren't alone. The ghost captain wasn't alone. He had his crew. And now, I want to ask you something. What would you have done? Would you try to run? Or would you stay and face whatever was coming? Tell me in the comments below. Oh, and while you're down there, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you're brave enough to hear what happens next. The boat jerked violently as James kept trying to start the engine, but it was no use. We were trapped in that eerie stillness, with the fog pressing down on us like a weight. The faces in the mist grew closer, swirling around us, distorted with expressions of rage and agony. It was like they were hungry. "Come on, man, start it," Mark shouted, panic rising in his voice. But the engine sputtered and died again. Abby was huddled at the front of the boat, her eyes wide, staring at the glowing eyes of the ghost captain. I could hear her muttering under her breath, "This isn't real. This isn't real." But it was real. Too real. The ghost captain's ship, impossibly old and drenched in decay, seemed to hover over the water, not quite touching the surface. It swayed slowly, like a beast ready to strike. The glowing lanterns on its deck flickered, casting long shadows that danced across the fog. And then we heard it. His voice. It was deep, hollow, like it came from the bottom of the sea itself. "You do not belong here." The words echoed through the mist, making the hair on my neck stand on end. James stopped messing with the engine and just stared at the captain, his face pale. "What the hell do you want?" he shouted, trying to sound tough, but his voice shook. The captain didn't answer, but the ship began to move. Slowly, it circled us, like a predator sizing up its prey. The creaking of its ancient wood was deafening now, echoing in the fog like bones cracking. And the voices, the whispers, kept getting louder. That's when I saw it. A shadowy figure climbing down the side of the captain's ship, barely visible in the swirling fog. It moved unnaturally, jerking and twitching, as if it wasn't used to moving anymore. As it got closer, I realized it wasn't human. Its face was twisted and gaunt, eyes sunken and empty. A member of the captain's cursed crew. "Guys," I whispered, barely able to get the words out. "We need to get out of here, now." But there was no way out. The fog was too thick, the boat wouldn't start, and that thing was getting closer. It reached the edge of the boat, and just stood there, staring at us with those hollow, dead eyes. I swear, I could feel its gaze burning into my soul. Mark grabbed an oar and held it out like a weapon, but we all knew it wouldn't do any good. That thing, whatever it was, wasn't something we could fight off. Suddenly, the boat lurched again, but this time it wasn't from James trying the engine. It was as if something beneath the water had grabbed hold of us, pulling us toward the ghost ship. The boat started moving on its own, inching closer and closer to the captain's vessel. "Get us out of here!" Abby screamed, tears streaming down her face now. I'm trying," James yelled back, but his voice was cracking with fear. We were pulled alongside the ghost captain's ship, and for the first time, I could see the details up close. The hull was covered in strange, ancient symbols, runes that seemed to glow faintly in the fog. Chains dangled from the sides, rusted but strong, and from the chains hung bones. Human bones. I had to fight the urge to vomit. And then, the captain spoke again, his voice booming over the sound of the creaking wood and the swirling fog. "You have entered my domain. Now you must pay the price." James, ever the hothead, shouted back, "We don't owe you anything. Let us go." The captain's glowing eyes locked onto James. "The sea takes what it is owed, and tonight, it takes you." Before we could even react, the shadowy figure that had climbed aboard lunged at James. Its hands, bony and decayed, grabbed his arm with a strength that didn't match its appearance. James screamed, trying to pull away, but it was no use. The thing dragged him toward the edge of the boat, toward the water. We all rushed to help him, grabbing at his legs, trying to pull him back. But the strength of that thing was unimaginable. It pulled him with ease, as if we weren't even there. "Help me, please," James screamed, pure terror in his voice. But we couldn't. We couldn't stop it. In a final desperate attempt, Mark swung the oar at the creature's head. It connected with a sickening crack, but the thing didn't even flinch. Instead, it yanked James over the edge of the boat and into the water. He disappeared into the fog with a splash, his screams echoing for a few moments, and then silence. We stared at the spot where he had gone under, our hearts pounding in our chests, the fog swirling around us like a nightmare. James was gone. Just like that. Abby collapsed to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Mark stood there, frozen, his hands still gripping the oar, as if he didn't know what to do next. And me. I just as stared. The boat drifted closer and closer to the rocky shore. The fog parted just enough for us to see the jagged cliffs looming ahead, and beyond them, a narrow strip of land. It was a small island, barely visible through the mist, but something about it felt wrong. The air was thick with a sense of dread, like the island itself was alive, waiting for us. The ghost ship stopped its circling and came to a halt, just a few feet away from us. The ghost captain stood at the helm, his glowing eyes fixed on us, unblinking. He raised one skeletal hand and pointed toward the island. "Your fate awaits," he said, his voice low and menacing. Mark let out a shaky breath. "What the hell does that mean?" "We're about to find out," I said, gripping the side of the boat as we drifted toward the shore. When the boat finally bumped against the rocks, we climbed out, careful not to cut ourselves on the sharp edges. The island was eerily quiet, except for the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks below. The fog still clung to everything, thick and suffocating, but now we could see the outline of something in the distance, a building, old and crumbling, its walls covered in dark, twisted vines. "What is that?" Abby asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It looks like a church," I replied, squinting through the fog, but it wasn't like any church I'd ever seen. The architecture was wrong, ancient, with symbols etched into the stone that made my skin crawl. Mark picked up a piece of driftwood and held it like a weapon as we made our way toward the building. If this is some kind of sick joke, I'm gonna... But his words were cut off by a loud crack. The ground beneath us shifted, and suddenly the path we were walking on crumbled away, revealing a deep, dark pit. We barely managed to jump back in time, our hearts pounding in our chests. "Jesus, what is this place?" Mark muttered, staring into the darkness below. I looked down into the pit, but it was too deep to see the bottom. It felt like it went on forever, like a gaping mouth waiting to swallow us whole. "We need to keep moving," I said, my voice shaky. "Whatever this place is, we're not safe here." As we continued toward the building, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The fog swirled around us, thick and oppressive, and every so often I thought I saw shadows moving just out of sight. But whenever I turned to look, there was nothing there. Finally, we reached the entrance of the church. The heavy wooden doors were covered in strange symbols, similar to the ones we had seen on the ghost captain's ship. Mark hesitated, his hand on the door handle. "Are we really going in there?" "We don't have a choice," I replied. "If we want to end this, we have to see what's inside." With a deep breath, Mark pushed the door open, and we stepped into the darkness. As we stepped inside the church, the temperature dropped immediately. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and decay, and the sound of our footsteps echoed eerily in the hollow space. It was hard to make out much in the dim light, but what little we could see was enough to send chills down my spine. The walls were lined with old, weathered pews, and the altar at the far end was draped in tattered cloth, covered in more of those strange symbols. Abby clung to my arm, her eyes wide with fear. "This place, it feels wrong, like we shouldn't be here." Mark glanced around nervously, still holding the piece of driftwood like a weapon. "This whole island is wrong. We need to find out what's going on and get the hell out of here." I nodded, but deep down, I wasn't sure if there was any getting out anymore. The ghost captain had brought us here for a reason, and I had a sinking feeling that whatever it was, we weren't going to like it. We cautiously made our way down the aisle, the wooden floor creaking under our feet. Every sound seemed magnified, the silence pressing in on us from all sides. As we approached the altar, something caught my eye, a faint, flickering light coming from behind it. "Do you see that?" I whispered, pointing toward the light. Mark narrowed his eyes. "Yeah, what is that?" "I don't know," I replied, taking a step closer. "But we need to find out." As we rounded the side of the altar, we discovered a small door, slightly ajar, with a faint glow seeping through the crack. My heart was pounding in my chest as I reached out and slowly pushed it open. Behind the door was a narrow staircase leading down into what looked like a basement or crypt, and the light was coming from somewhere below. "We're not seriously going down there, are we?" Abby asked, her voice trembling. "We don't have a choice," I said, swallowing hard. "Whatever's down there, it's part of this. It might be the only way to stop him." Mark didn't look thrilled about it, but he nodded. "Let's get this over with." One by one, we descended the staircase, the air growing colder and heavier with each step. The light was brighter now, but it had an unnatural quality to it, like it was coming from something that wasn't supposed to exist. As we reached the bottom, the narrow passage opened up into a large, underground chamber. The room was unlike anything I'd ever seen. The walls were covered in strange, intricate carvings, symbols, runes, and depictions of sea creatures, storms, and ships. In the center of the room was a large stone pedestal, and on top of it was an ancient-looking book, bound in dark, weathered leather. The pages seemed to glow with that same eerie light, as if the book itself was alive. Abby gasped. "What is this place?" "It's a ritual chamber," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "This is where it all started. The curse, the ghost captain, everything." Mark stepped forward, eyeing the book suspiciously. "You think that book has the answers?" "It has to," I replied. "Look at the carvings. This isn't just a church. It's a place of power. Whoever built this, they were trying to summon something from the sea." Abby backed away from the pedestal, shaking her head. "This is insane. We shouldn't be here. We need to leave." "We can't," I said, my eyes locked on the book. "Not until we understand what's going on. This is the key, the ghost captain's curse. It started here." Mark reached out toward the book, but the moment his fingers touched the cover, the room seemed to shift. The air grew thick, and a low, rumbling sound echoed through the chamber. The carvings on the walls began to glow, their light pulsating in time with the beating of our hearts. "Do you feel that?" I asked, my voice shaking. Abby nodded, her face pale. "It's like the island is alive." Suddenly the floor beneath us began to tremble, and the sound of rushing water filled the chamber. The ground cracked open, revealing a deep, dark chasm beneath us. From the depths, we could hear the roar of the sea, and the whispers, those same haunting whispers we had heard on the boat, grew louder. Mark stumbled backward, his eyes wide with terror. "We need to get out of here!" But it was too late. From the chasm, something began to rise. It was massive, its form shifting and writhing as it emerged from the darkness. At first it looked like a shadow, but as it climbed higher I realized it was made of water. Dark, swirling water, like the very essence of the sea itself, and at its center were eyes. Glowing, hateful eyes, staring straight at us. "The ghost captain," Abby whispered, her voice barely audible. "No," I said, my heart racing. "It's something worse." The creature loomed over us, its massive watery form twisting and undulating as it seemed to grow larger by the second. Those glowing eyes? They were filled with something primal, something beyond hate. It wasn't just malice. It was as if this thing was born from the very anger of the sea itself. Something ancient that had been waiting, watching, and now it was free. We backed up slowly, our feet stumbling over the uneven ground, but the creature followed, its presence suffocating. Every breath we took felt like we were inhaling water, drowning while standing on dry land. Mark's voice trembled. "What the hell is that thing?" It's not human." "No," I replied, swallowing hard. "It's not. But I think it's connected to the curse. This might be what the ghost captain was trying to control." Abby was shaking her head, her eyes filled with tears. "We need to leave. Now. We can't fight this, whatever it is." But I knew we couldn't just run. The island wouldn't let us. The whispers, the fog, the strange occurrences, they had all been leading up to this moment. This creature was the key, the source of the curse. And if we didn't do something, it would consume us just like it had consumed the ghost captain. I glanced at the book, still sitting on the pedestal, its pages glowing with that eerie light. "The book," I said, my voice hoarse. "There's something in there, a way to stop this." Mark looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "You want to read the cursed book? Are you insane? Do you have a better idea?" I snapped. "We don't have time. It's getting stronger." The creature let out a low, rumbling growl, its eyes narrowing as it watched us. It was as if it knew what I was thinking, knew we were about to make a move. The air around us grew even colder, and the walls of the chamber began to crack, water seeping through the gaps and pooling at our feet. I grabbed the book and opened it to the first glowing page. The text was written in a language I didn't understand, but the symbols were familiar, the same ones that had been carved into the walls of the church and the altar. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to focus, flipping through the pages, searching for something. Suddenly, one page caught my eye. It was different from the others, an illustration of the creature we were facing, its form rising from the sea, surrounded by storms and wreckage. Beneath it, there was a single word, written in bold, glowing letters: Tethalis. Abby stepped closer, her voice trembling. "What does it mean?" "I don't know," I whispered, "but I think it's the creature's name." Mark's eyes widened. "You think, if we know its name, we can control it?" "It's possible," I said, glancing nervously at the creature. "Names have power. If we say it, maybe we can bind it, or at least weaken it." The creature let out a deafening roar, the chamber shaking violently as water surged up from the chasm, flooding the floor. We were running out of time. I took a deep breath, gripping the book tightly. "We have to do this. Together." Abby and Mark exchanged a glance, then nodded, their faces pale but determined. We stood in a circle, facing the creature, and in unison, we spoke the name. Tethalis. The creature froze, its watery form rippling as if it had been struck. For a moment, everything went silent. The air grew still, the water stopped rising, and the creature's eyes flickered. But then, it began to laugh. A deep, guttural sound that echoed through the chamber, vibrating in our bones. The name hadn't weakened it. It had made it stronger. What just happened?" Abby asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," I said, panic rising in my chest. "It should have worked. The name should have..." Before I could finish, the creature lunged toward us, its massive form crashing down like a wave. We scrambled to get out of the way, but the force of the water knocked us off our feet, slamming us against the walls. I gasped for air, struggling to stay afloat as the room filled with water. "Tethalis!" I shouted again, but the name had lost its power. The creature wasn't bound by it. It thrived on it. Mark surfaced next to me, coughing and sputtering. "What do we do now?" "I don't know," I admitted, my mind racing. There has to be something we're missing, something in the book. I struggled to stay above the rising water, my fingers fumbling as I flipped through the pages of the book. The text was glowing brighter now, almost blinding, but I could make out fragments, rituals, sacrifices, ancient gods of the sea. And then on the final page, I saw it. A symbol, different from the others. It was a key. "The symbol," I gasped. "We need to draw it. It's the only way to stop Tethalis." Abby, who was barely managing to keep her head above water, shouted back, "How? We don't have anything to draw with." Mark looked around frantically, then grabbed a piece of debris floating nearby. It was a shard of glass from one of the broken windows. "I'll carve it into the wall." "Hurry!" I screamed, the water now up to our chests. Mark swam to the nearest wall and began carving the symbol as quickly as he could. The creature let out another roar, sensing what we were trying to do. It surged toward him, but Abby and I threw ourselves in its path, trying to distract it. "Hurry, Mark!" I shouted. As the creature reared back, preparing to strike, Mark made the final cut. The moment the symbol was complete, the entire room was bathed in a blinding light. The creature let out a deafening scream, its form unraveling, dissolving into mist and water as the light consumed it. The chamber shook violently, and the water began to recede. For a moment I thought we had done it, that we had finally defeated the curse. But then I felt it. A cold, creeping sensation at the back of my mind, like icy fingers clawing their way into my thoughts. The curse wasn't gone. It had just changed. Do you think the curse has truly been lifted, or has it found a new way to haunt them? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. The cold sensation at the back of my mind grew stronger, spreading through my body like a chill that came from deep within. I staggered backward, my vision blurring as I fought to stay in control. Something wasn't right. The curse, Tethalus, it wasn't defeated. It was inside me. Mark and Abby rushed to my side, their faces etched with concern. "Are you okay?" Abby asked, her voice trembling. I don't know," I whispered, clutching my head. The room around me seemed to spin, the walls warping and bending, as if reality itself was unraveling. "Something's wrong. It didn't die. I can feel it." Mark's eyes widened in horror. "You're saying the curse, it's in you?" I nodded slowly, struggling to breathe as the weight of the realization hit me. It's not just me. The curse, it's in all of us now. Abby's face paled, her hands shaking as she backed away. No, that can't be true. We stopped it. We drew the symbol. But deep down, I knew the truth. The curse had been bound to the island, tied to the ancient magic that the ghost captain had tried to harness. And now that we had broken the binding, the curse was free. Free to attach itself to anyone it chose. Suddenly, the ground beneath us began to shake, the walls of the chamber cracking and crumbling as the island itself seemed to react to the curse's release. Water rushed in from all sides, flooding the room once again. "We have to get out of here," Mark shouted, grabbing Abby's arm and pulling her towards the exit. "Come on, we don't have much time." I stumbled after them, my head spinning, the cold grip of the curse tightening around my mind. Every step felt like I was wading through quicksand, the weight of the curse dragging me down. My vision flickered, and for a moment, I saw something. Something dark and twisted, lurking just beneath the surface of my thoughts. Tethalus was still there, watching, waiting. We made it out of the chamber just as the walls collapsed behind us, the sound of rushing water and crumbling stone echoing through the tunnels. The fog had returned, thicker than ever, swirling around us as we stumbled toward the beach. But there was no relief in reaching the shore. The sea was churning, violent waves crashing against the rocks, as if the ocean itself was angry. And in the distance, through the fog, I saw it, the ghost captain's ship. It was still there, its tattered sails flapping in the wind, its ghostly crew standing silently on deck. "We have to get off this island," Abby whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the sea, "before it's too late." Mark nodded, his face grim. "But how? There's no way off. The boat we came in is gone." I glanced back at the ship, my heart pounding in my chest. "There's only one way," I said quietly. "We have to take the ghost captain's ship." Abby stared at me in disbelief. "Are you insane? That ship is cursed." "I know," I replied, my voice steady. "But we're already cursed. If we stay here, we die. If we take the ship, maybe we have a chance." Mark hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. "He's right. It's the only way." We moved quickly, making our way through the thick fog toward the shore, where the ghostly ship waited. As we approached, the crew, silent, spectral figures, watched us, their hollow eyes glowing in the mist. They didn't move, didn't speak. They just stared. With trembling hands, I climbed aboard, the cold, damp wood creaking beneath my feet. The ship felt alive, pulsing with an unnatural energy that sent shivers down my spine. But there was no turning back now. We had made our choice. As Mark and Abby followed me aboard, the ship's sails unfurled, and the wind picked up, carrying us out to sea. The island faded into the distance, swallowed by the fog. For a moment, there was silence, just the sound of the waves and the creaking of the ship. But then, from the depths of the fog, a voice whispered in my ear, a voice I had heard before. "Welcome to my crew." I froze, my blood turning to ice. The voice. It was the ghost captain, but it wasn't just in my head. It was real. I turned to Mark and Abby, but their faces were blank, their eyes distant. They had heard it too. And then I realized the truth. The curse hadn't just bound itself to us. It had made us part of the crew. We were the new ghosts. The wind howled through the tattered sails as the ship sailed further into the fog, disappearing into the endless cursed sea. And as we drifted into the unknown, I knew one thing for certain. There was no escape. Do you believe there is any hope left for them? Or are they doomed to sail the cursed sea forever? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the story and felt the chills just like we did while telling it, don't forget to hit the like button to let us know you're loving the content. And if you think this story deserves to reach more people, go ahead and share it with your friends. Also, what would you do if you were in their place? Would you try to escape? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more chilling tales like this.